Okay, this is March 30th, Wednesday, and what I'm doing is I'm making these three videos to help you be more effective at picking topics to put into your final group report for the course and also specifically identify where they are on the course webpage. So basically, in the middle of the night, I thought of this sort of little list and I thought to myself, I should tell them things that they must have in the report, things that they should have in the report, and things that they might have in the report. So when they're looking down the list of all the topics that I teach them, they'll have a better idea of what things they should really make an effort to put in and write about, and other things that they can ignore or not spend so much time in it. So the first thing is to talk about this with some other resources that I already have. And I have a number of different videos which I previously have talking about this, and the location of those videos, if you just go to the top of the course webpage right here and you see where it says miscellaneous right there, if you click on miscellaneous, this takes you to a page with a whole bunch of things about MRK460, like read the newspaper, yada yada. And there's 5 videos here talking about group work, what the report should look like, the binding, the pages, the table of contents. This one is about using mature language. Don't say get some money, say acquire financing. And this one is also about coordinating the submission with other group members. You should be surprised how many people hand in report and I don't have all the names of the members on it, or I can't determine whether one person is or is not a member of the group. So those are things, and also spelling and grammar and how you can help each other with that. All right. So those are some things for your consideration. Then going back to my little list here. So the other thing too is things that you must have in the report. Who is in the group? That's kind of like a obvious thing, but you'd be surprised how many people hand in a report and it's a nickname of somebody for the first name because they only know their WhatsApp name. They don't know their last name. Their last name is actually 2 names. They don't know which one comes first in the alphabetical ordering. Also, table of contents. The table of contents is really important because I can look at that and at a glance pretty much guess that they've got most of the points covered or not. And also, when you number the pages, please, the cover page is not number 1. Table of contents is not number 2. All right, the first page is a page of writing. And the last page does not include the references. I've had students hand in a report and they said it was 14 pages. Well, it wasn't 14 pages, it was 9 pages because when I actually looked at the cover page, they counted that. And then the table of contents, they counted that. And the references pages, they counted that. And the final blank page, they counted that. So just be honest with the number of pages. And whether you write single spaced or double spaced, I don't care. Because what I do is I just put down on the grading mark sheet when I'm doing the report, I'll put the date at which I received it. I'll put down something like 22 pages SP for a single spaced, or I put D for double spaced. Don't worry about that, okay? I count it properly so that you get credit for what you did. And don't worry about the volume. I mean, or trying to make the minimum volume. Sometimes if you have a chart or a diagram that's worth a half a page of writing, I take that into account as well. However, at the same time, when I said I don't necessarily count volume explicitly, don't hand in something that's 22 or 24 pages and think you're going to get an A mark, because this is a report that covers teaching you for 3.5 months and there is no final exam. So when you look at all the topics that you should have in there, it can be very easy that these final projects are in either 29, 32, 35 pages, just because of the number of things that you're going to deal with. So let me now go through the list of topics and tell you which ones you must have, which ones you should have, and which things you might have in the report. Okay? So let's move that off to the side. Sorry, move this off to the side here, and we'll start scrolling through. So the first thing that you must have is some short explanation of whether the company, whether you're doing Starbucks or McDonald's or Apple, are they growing and expanding by market penetration or market development? What types of opportunities are they doing? A little bit of diversification? Are they coming up with some new product lines? For example, if you're doing Canada Goose, you'll say, look, They're not focusing on the coats anymore. They're focusing on boots and shoes, which would be, product development. Or diversification would be an example of Apple moving away from the iMac computers to selling tablets. Okay, and then you could make some general comments about things that they're trying to do, and you wouldn't find this explicitly in the annual report. You'd have to make inferences by saying things like the company president said in 2011 that they're going to increase revenue by acquiring other companies and other resources. And if he says that specifically, then you can make a note of that. Or you can find sometimes in the annual report the company president may said, to reduce our vulnerability and as a contingency plan, we decided to import more parts of supplies from different countries in Asia, not just through China. So there you have a point about diversifying sources of supplies. Okay. Then one thing you definitely have to have in the report, and this would be a major foundation of the headings, you definitely would have the 6 environments, and I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. And you would also have the 4 Ps. Now, different companies would have different things. For example, when you do the P for promotion, you might have a whole screen captured collection of different things that Apple did for their viral videos, for example. Or you may talk about how Starbucks has increased or decreased the locations across the globe, and you may have like a map of some of the major countries with a little dot for all the Starbucks that are located there. So that would be, place, for example. And then product, you may talk about how the physical features of the product have changed, or the packaging, or those kinds of things. But this is a major section. There might be 2 or 3, maybe even 4 pages on each section. I'll expand upon that in a little bit. Competition, for example, right? So within competition, you may talk about some of the other companies that have products that are similar to theirs, or some that could offer competition in the future. And you may also be able to identify some of the industry associations that you use. For example, if you're talking about a company like Maple Leaf Foods or McCain Foods, you can talk about the Canadian Agricultural Products Association. Or if you're talking about McDonald's or Tim Hortons, you could talk about the Canadian Restaurant Association. And if you went to the Canadian Restaurant Association website, you might find some articles there about how the restaurants in Canada have dealt with COVID and so on. Globalization. This is something that you don't have to have, but you should have if you can find it. And talk about the globalization of production, meaning where things are coming from in different places in order to reduce their vulnerability and diversify sources of supply. You can also talk about sustainability. I wouldn't say you have to have it, but it's definitely a should have. And you can talk about the sustainability in the context of pollution generated by how their products are made, or how they access resources from different countries around the world in a way that makes the people who produce the resources sustain themselves to continue doing that without endangering the environment. And that would lead to things like, water management, or regrowing or replanting trees, or things like that. Then obviously a big thing would be the social cultural environment. So, when you're going back to your list of the top 6 environments here, someone's going to be writing maybe 3 or 4 pages about the social cultural environment, because in there you'll talk about a number of different things. For example, marketing using diasporas, and also challenges with different cultural things like mother tongue marketing and different cultures. And if your company does business in the United States, you can use some references regarding that. Guerrilla marketing and viral marketing would be a part of the promotions of the 4 Ps there. And ethics. Ethics is a must-have. Every report should have something about that. And then you would talk in the context of the CSR, corporate social responsibility. And you might mention 2 or 3 of these. For example, you might talk about how the company made a big deal of having a good relationship with suppliers, or that the company made a good deal about treating their employees properly with benefits, and that they're responsible to society in terms of where they operated and how they operated. And you might find something on ethics or whistleblowers, but it might be a little bit difficult to do that specifically. Stakeholders also, you could talk about who are some of the main stakeholders in the company, both domestically and internationally. And I wouldn't worry about the trade theories thing here. That would be might have in the report. Um, when you get into talking about the political environment, there's political risk and contingency planning, things at the risk of threat situations, and what kind of crisis management situations may be facing the company. It's not expected that you would know how to solve those problems, but simply state that here is a problem that needs to be solved. And the personal risk situation is good for you to know, but it's not something you have to put in your report in the context of the company that you're doing. Okay, and then dealing with the government and export financing, I don't think it'd be easy to find out information where they got government financing from. But for people that are doing large companies that are exporting, you may find that they get some subsidies or that they benefit from tariffs being put on competitors' products brought into the country. So that's an example. So subsidies would be things like the government gave them allowance for the amount of money they spent on investing in high-tech research, as an example. Physical, geographic, environment, and weather extremes. Definitely, there could be 2 or 3, 4 pages on this, particularly with maps of the world showing where the company has been operating and what are the risk situations in those areas, like earthquakes or tidal waves or typhoons or so on. And although I didn't have specific words about this, I did have a couple of videos talking about where people are operating in different countries around the world, which makes you think about things differently. For example, the U.S. economy is mostly on the East Coast, not the West Coast. And then when you look at the map of China, and you realize that most of the people are on this side, not that side. So it gives you a different way of thinking about where things are in the world. So these maps may or may not apply to some of the companies that you're picking. So I would put that in the category of you might have something to talk about there. Okay. Indicators of economic supremacy was just something that I created to teach you about how you make choices between countries. Foreign direct investment concepts. This is something that you should have in there. You should have some indication of some of the things that your company has done. For example, did they go overseas to basically follow the customers? For example, what that would mean is if Honda decided to open up a factory in America to sell cars in America, would the parts supplying companies to Honda, like the tire companies and the engine companies and the frame, would they also move to America to supply as well? Did they get involved in a foreign direct investment situation to buy market share? For example, sometimes Coca-Cola may decide to go into a country like Russia, even though Pepsi was in there before, in order to develop some market share to make it competitive to then sell to other former countries of the Soviet Union, such as Poland and Hungary and Ukraine and so on. And was it supported by any host government situations? For example, did the governments of the countries that these people went into with their companies receive any government support from them? Okay. OECD, which I talked about in class, is a source of information. You might be able to mention that in your report, but not necessarily. The World Trade Organization I talked about in class on March 30th, and I will talk about it also on the 31st and April 1st. That's an organization whose purpose is to adjudicate and rule between two countries that are competing about something like, for example, a tax or tariffs on steel coming out of Brazil versus steel products manufactured in Canada. You should also have something about the foreign exchange market and how that affects your company. And in here, there's some explanations which you can read, which are very simple. You can simply talk about some of the activities of the company in buying currency exchange in advance, so they could take advantage of the high Canadian dollar to be able to buy US dollars at a low price, and then when they had to spend US dollars to buy something, they had an effective advantage there. The IMF and the World Bank are slightly similar. The World Bank is involved in providing money to countries that have suffered from war or large geographic catastrophes, and it gives that money through the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development. And there's a number of examples in here. So the reason why you mention that is because sometimes your company can be involved in that rebuilding. For example, if you're a company that like Microsoft or Apple or Samsung, you can get a contract to supply cell phone network technology to the Ukraine for rebuilding after the war with Russia. So that's what the World Bank does for things like that. The International Monetary Fund loans monies to countries all over the world for problems with their currency exchange rate, and there's some examples here of what they do. For example, it had previously loaned to the Russia with the economic problems they had in 2000, 1999, and the same thing in Bosnia and same thing in Pakistan. So you can read about those examples there. And the one big thing which I haven't taught you yet is talking about collaborative relationships. So this is a must-have. You'll have a section in your project that talks about did the company involve themselves in a licensing of technology, or did they do any contract manufacturing? For example, in the case of Apple, yes, they did contract manufacturing with a company called Foxconn in China. Did they have any joint ventures? Were they just a co-op joint venture, or was it an equity joint venture? Equity joint venture means you pay money to be able to join together and create a third-party entity. And did they have any strategic alliances or consortiums with other large companies? And we'll also talk about counter trade, but I don't expect you to find examples of that. So that would be a thing you might have in the report. Choice of entry modes. This is just something I teach you about the basic strategies, but that may be something you might have in the report specifically because it's repeated. Trade missions. If you could find some information about a trade mission that they participated in, that would be great, but I don't expect you would because that'd be fairly difficult. One of the things, though, that I would expect you to talk about is outsourcing and offshoring, which I'll talk about in the last class or the second last class, also TQM and JIT. So these three things are all related to how the companies be able to do things more effectively and efficiently in a competitive environment. Outsourcing is particularly a powerful topic. And TQM means total quality management. The things the company does in order to be able to produce a higher level of quality, which goes with this explanation here of why 99.9% is not accurate enough. And this little explanation is a good thing for you to read. And just in time also minimizes the cost of companies paying for things to sit in the warehouse in advance, and also helps them be more effective when they're producing a vehicle to minimize parts that are installed improperly. And yeah, that will be the end of that section there. Actually, I've gone right to the end of section 3. I've just redone that section. Okay.